financing, and then I started following terrorist money around the world. And that led me to the Department of Justice in about 2012, and I got into Bitcoin at that time. And I helped to build out some of the early crypto investigative initiatives and strategies at the DOJ. And following that, I went off to business school and then went to co-lead KPMG's crypto asset services practice, where we did broad consulting to crypto native companies and financial institutions that were building products in the space.
My name is Lilia Infante. I am the CEO and founder of Cat Labs, which is a startup that builds tools to fight crypto crime. In my previous life, I was a special agent with Department of Justice. I led one of the biggest task forces in the federal government that focuses exclusively on cryptocurrency-enabled crimes for almost a decade. So I was responsible for a lot of the crypto takedowns that have happened in the past few years. The recent one being the Hydra market that was taken down a few months ago. It was responsible for about 80% of all cryptocurrency dark web transactions, and also was a huge money laundering platform for cyber criminals.
Well, awesome. It seems like over the last half year, if it wasn't a bankruptcy, it was some headline from regulators. I think everyone's a little worried. Usually crypto overestimates regulation. Maybe this time the worry is justified. So just to jump in, I think it'd be helpful, based on your guys' background, reaching back to your past lives. What are the regulators thinking? It's this big, scary crypto. Do they actually understand it? I'd just be curious to get kind of your past insider view into maybe past forward that they have, things they're doing now. Are they actually educated? Any kind of background like that?
Yeah, so I think it's definitely hard to tell exactly what they're thinking. I think the best clue we have is their public statements and enforcement actions that we're seeing coming down. And I think the reason we're seeing so many things happening at once, which is what really is everyone kind of up in arms here, I think is we're just coming out of a really crazy year last year, right? So much happened, obviously concluding in the FTX implosion near the end of the year, that I think the regulators are taking action to let the American public and let the policymakers know that they're not totally asleep at the wheel. They feel like there has to be something done, and so they're taking action. I think, unfortunately, a lot of that doesn't come with enough clear sort of guidance as to what they are thinking, what their underlying rationale is. And so I think it's our job to kind of let them know where we're coming from as a community, what we're building, what the use cases are, et cetera, to try and hopefully make an impact on their thinking.
I think from the criminal side at the DOJ, and it's been several years since I worked there, and Lily could probably speak more about this, but what I found over the years is initially the view was that crypto was only used for illicit trafficking, illicit financing. But as time went on and there was more legitimate economic activity across the crypto ecosystem, coupled with the realization that the government could have insight into all of the flows of funds and make legal seizures of illicit money much easier than they could in the fiat world, there was definitely a push to understand how to operate within the crypto ecosystem and upskill the workforce on investigating the new economic criminal activity.
Yeah, and I think from law enforcement perspective, in the past few years, I think because crypto made it so easy to monetize a lot of crimes, to include hacks, scams, and fraud, the sheer volume of crimes that are coming in has just exploded because of that. So I think the government is definitely overwhelmed by that, but at the same time, they are building several task forces to be able to address the influx of crime that's coming in, and also purchasing tools from the private sector. So that also gives us, an opportunity to service that market and to make sure that government is essentially able to address the influx of crime that comes in just from how easily crypto made it to monetize different types of crime.
Yeah, maybe a follow-up question for Patrick and Lily. Just like, the chain analysis do their report, they estimate how much crime is facilitated in crypto. Like, what's kind of your guys' mental model for like, is that accurate? Is it not accurate? Or like, if you have a number, how much crime is, committed with crypto, either criminals using stable coins or stealing crypto? I'd be curious if you guys have any thoughts around that.
Yeah, it's a very difficult metrics to really pin down, because if you look at the Chainalysis report, I think they said $20 billion last year was illicit use of crypto. But the problem is their report is based on inputs from on-chain data, right? Which a lot of the crime happens off-chain first, so like cash businesses or cash illicit businesses like drug trafficking, for example, usually starts with cash and then goes into crypto to facilitate the money laundering trail, which crypto has made it a lot easier to launder money and cheaper and faster, and to generally to transfer value across borders, right? So a lot of traditional criminal organizations like drug traffickers, terrorist organizations, cyber criminals are now using crypto to launder money, even though a lot of these transactions you can't see on chain. So I think the number is a lot higher than what Chainalysis is portraying because of that. And I saw this, firsthand when I was at DOJ. I was, one of the first people that did some undercover money laundering operations with crypto. So I've seen in the past couple of years an explosion of traditional criminal organizations using crypto, especially stablecoins, to transfer value across borders. So I think that's not really reflected in the number. But I would still say it's probably under 2% of all of crypto use would be illicit type crypto use.
Yeah, and I think that's very similar to what takes place in the fiat world. I think it's under 5% of fiat transactions are illicit. So kind of the crypto ecosystem seems to mirror that level of illicit activity in the through the rails there.
Rashan, I ask you, you hear all these headlines. Elizabeth Warren's soon going after MEV searchers. There's all these bills out here. What, from your perspective, is actually going to get done? In the next year, maybe a couple years, like, are there any bills or frameworks or certain areas even that you think they'll actually get something done, and good or bad, at least you have some guideline or some framework to operate within? And then I don't know if you have a view on, like, do you think things like companies moving overseas, so like economic activity moving somewhere else because there's so much uncertainty, like increases political movement forward, or how do they kind of think about that?
Yeah, so it's hard to tell what's going to happen first. I think what everyone talks about in Capitol Hill or in Washington is the quote-unquote low-hanging fruit of getting stablecoins done, right? Building out a framework and building a regulatory structure that people can move forward. Obviously, it's a critical part of the crypto sort of ecosystem, right? And so that's a logical first step. But I think that we saw a push last year in the House Financial Services Committee. They almost got an agreement on stablecoins, but they were two people, the chair and the ranking member from opposite parties. They were so close and couldn't get it done. So that's not a great sign that there is a ton of shared ground for folks to get something done quickly. I think that in the wake of FTX, there's a real push to get something done around centralized actors and making sure to bring some sort of transparency and accountability there that people feel doesn't exist now. That could get done, but what that looks like is hard to see. And I think one of the big things to do is make sure that DeFi protocols aren't locked up sort of in the exact same way, and sort of overlook the nuance there.
It's interesting. Yeah, I think one of the other trends recently too is, crypto has its roots in this sort of decentralize everything, but I think everyone's a bit worried, and so maybe people are like, well, what can we do to kind of help these guys either get educated? Maybe it's tools. So I'd be kind of interested in your own views. Maybe start with Lily. Just like, what are you kind of building, and how does it help the government, and why is it important? Or, does it go with philosophy of crypto? Like things like that. How does it kind of feed into both those angles?
Yeah, so at Cat Labs, we're building two types of tools. One is reactive tools. So reactive meaning after the crime happens, we help governments with the investigation and specifically in recovering cryptocurrency assets from criminal devices like phones, computers, and other digital evidence. So we automate that very manual and arduous process that requires a great deal of expertise and experience. And then also we're building proactive security tools, right, to prevent a lot of the digital asset theft from happening in the first place, right? So preventing investors from losing money, that also eases the burden on the government to address these kinds of crimes.
Yeah, I'd like to echo Lily's comments there. So I really think that the government having the right tools to have insight into the ecosystem is very important. That's why I'm very excited about what Lily's building at Cat Labs. We're an investor in her company. But security across the board is very important, and it goes hand in hand with regulation. So when you see the hacks like the Lazarus Group from North Korea hacking Harmony Protocol and the Ronin network and taking all of that money, it's not a good look for the ecosystem. It gets the attention of the regulators, and when there's issues like that, more strict regulation is bound to come down the pipeline to stop sanctioned countries from getting money and also to protect investors. So at RW3, I focus a lot on exploring security companies, and there's a lot of new startups coming up to make the audit system better. There's different tools across the board and platforms to secure smart contracts, and that's, I think, going to be one of the most important things for the ecosystem to do, so regulators can get comfortable with how we operate as an ecosystem here.
And Mayor Rashan, obviously you guys are building the ecosystem. You have an actual product out there. It happens to be maybe in a kind of testier space around derivatives. But like, what do you guys kind of do to interact with regulators? How are you thinking about being proactive and working together with them? And like, maybe that sheds light if there's any developers out here, how, kind of a framework they could work under and some things you guys have done that have been positive. I'd be interested in that.
Yeah, so I think regarding how we're communicating with policymakers, there's a saying, a kind of trite saying in the policy space: if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, right? And so it's important for us to be a part of the conversation and do whatever we can to make sure that we are present. And obviously that's a focus or a real value that the leadership of my company sees at dYdX. And so that's why I've been brought on the last couple of months to make sure that we have a voice in Washington, but not just for our company, but for DeFi and also for crypto in general. I think that we haven't been a part of that conversation to the extent that we need to be. And so I think, this is a little bit of just a message. I think, you don't have to be a policy professional to make, effective appeals to policymakers. I think, Congress, ultimately they answer to their constituents, and it's easy to kind of lose in, the idea of how much we really have an impact. And if everybody does call in, it does make a difference. Ultimately, policymakers, members of Congress want to get reelected. They want to be able to maintain their influence, and they're going to do that by appealing to what people desire.
Calling my congressman right after this. But when you're sitting on the table, even though you're there, do you feel like they're trying to put you on the menu, or is it like a positive, receptive conversation? Maybe it varies by subject, but.
Yeah, I think, so any quote-unquote given policy conversation or table has several different stakeholders around it. So there's going to be people who are for an idea and against an idea, along with the policymakers themselves. And so if we take ourselves out of the conversation, the people who are advocating for the things that we don't want, their voice is going to speak much louder than ours. So I think that there are real adversaries in this conversation who we have to be careful of. And so ultimately the policymakers they will write the laws, and we can do our best to educate them and influence them, but we can't do that if we're not showing up.
And then maybe Lilia, on your side too, when you're obviously selling your tools to government agencies, like, is there positive vibes from them? Are they helping you with the product? Are they kind of like, we just need to get rid of crypto completely? Are they kind of like, crypto's not going away, so we need to understand it, have the tool set to, get people's crypto back when it does get stolen? Like, how has the relationship worked so far? Whatever you can share around that would be kind of interesting. Maybe there's others working with government agencies on tools and things like that, but.
Yeah, I don't think there is really a view that crypto needs to die or needs to go away completely. I think the government is especially the federal government, is being very proactive in procuring tools to help them address the crime that's coming out of the industry. Just basically, the goal is to clean up the industry, right? And whenever hacks, scams, and fraud are happening, that victims are able to to go somewhere to get their money back, or at least to get the crime investigated, which right now is very difficult to do, because a lot of these hacks and scams are under the federal threshold to investigate. So if they go to the FBI and it's under $1 million, they usually get referred to the local police, and the local police don't have as many tools and budgets and experience in order to be able to address and investigate these crimes. So I think bridging that gap and basically allowing local law enforcement and empowering local law enforcement to do these investigations is going to go a long way in cleaning up the industry, and also building automation tools and investigative tools for not just local but also federal governments is going to be a huge help, I think, in that regard.
Awesome. Yeah, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. Just the trend we see is like all my buddies are moving offshore because they're concerned with the regulatory environment. So I'd just be curious from all your perspectives, like whether it's cross-border crimes or how dYdX is approaching regulators across the globe. Obviously, these are open platforms, and like Patrick, maybe how you think about investing in companies in different jurisdictions and what they're providing to improve the ecosystem and its interactions with regulators across the globe. I don't want to take that in any direction, but be curious on kind of your different perspectives on those.
Yeah, I mean, I think from an investor standpoint, we look at crypto's global, right? So we just inherently look at global companies to invest in, and each country has essentially a different regulatory framework, and it's really hard to keep up. But we invest in companies that are thinking about how they're interacting with the regulators and the regulatory bodies of their jurisdictions. That's very important to us. We're essentially pro-regulation. It's obviously a good thing if it's done right, and I hope that there's not. I hope, because of the unclarity in the U.S., I hope we don't see more regulatory arbitrage and companies starting to build overseas because it's easier. I think that'd be just a bad thing for the United States and the crypto ecosystem in general. But we invest in companies not from a regulation perspective, but just to have a broad portfolio, and there's just great companies being built all over the world. We invested in a company based out of Nigeria that's building a stablecoin saving product to help the citizens over there not have their wealth degraded through inflation. So there's just a lot of use cases that exist overseas that don't exist in the U.S., and we're excited about all of that.
Maybe Lilia, just a view on like, are the government agencies working together across the world? How's the coordination going? Things like that.
Well, so in my experience, the best criminal use for crypto is money laundering in the context of transferring value across borders, right? So crypto crime is always going to be global, right? So I think we have to pay attention to U.S. regulation, because usually other countries generally follow historically when it comes to financial regulation. So we have to really pay attention to what the U.S. is doing with that. Also, it being the biggest consumer economy, right? So I'm seeing also a lot of, I'm seeing a problem with state actors, right, using cryptocurrency to evade sanctions, like North Korea and Russia, and also to finance their operations, right, when they don't have access to the financial services. So that's something that we have to kind of tackle together as well. And that the hack risks with that are huge, because of course the Russians and North Koreans love to hack DeFi protocols and in general US companies. So we have to really stay on top of that.
Awesome. Maybe Rashan, closing thoughts. How do you guys engage with global regulators, think about their different rules?
Yeah, I think, well, touching on a bit the international idea, we aim to empower more traders with transparent tools around the world, but unfortunately, because of these perpetuals is like one of our main products people really love, we can't offer that to U.S. customers, right? And so I think there's still a lot of room for the United States to move forward on financial innovation. And so we'll be continuing to interact with policymakers and with regulators to hopefully help them see that perspective.
Awesome. I think that's all we all have time for. Thank you guys. Thanks for everyone for listening.
Thank you.